Hey, welcome to the lesson about GCP white box methodology. In this lesson, we are actually going to be learning about how to do a proper white box review of a GCP environment. So in this case, we are just going to be asking for read permissions to the client. We are going to be enumerating all the services that the client is using, finding low-hanging fruits, finding misconfigurations, finding vulnerabilities, finding anything security-wise that we need to report to them so they can improve their security posture of their GCP environment. I hope you learn a lot. I think this lesson is going to be very, very interesting for you because at the end we are going to be using all that we have already learned in a more structured and methodology version. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this lesson. So you're going to be starting a white box review, a read-only review of a GCP organization or a GCP project. And you might be asking yourself, well, which extra privilege do you need to perform this assessment? So of course, ideally, you should be asking only for the exact permissions that you need. But in reality, in most cases, you are going to be starting to do a pen test over a GCP organization or project without really knowing what you are going to be finding there. And because you don't know things such as even which services they are using, you cannot just specify you need read access over these services. So my recommendation is just to access for overall read access. This way you should be able to enumerate most of the services, most of the assets of the company without asking never for permissions to modify stuff. Also, you need to make sure that you understand a service, you understand a permission before you ask it to the client, to the organization. Well, because at the end you might need to justify them why you need such permission. And of course, if the company that you're working for is using some nice security measures, they will always be asking you, okay, but why do you need this permission? Because of course, GCP is a very complex cloud, and you could perform a lot of damage if you compromise it. So, how to ask for access? Well, you can ask them to create a new project, then create a new service account inside this project, and give you some JSON credentials to this service account. Also, it is recommended to ask them to create a new user. And this is interesting because some tools are only going to be working with service account credentials because that's how they were developed. However, if you want to access the console, the web console, you need to be accessing it as a user. That's why if you can, you should be asking for those. In reality, in my case, most of the companies are just going to be creating me a new user, and that's everything I'm going to get. It's okay, maybe there is some tool that I won't be able to launch, but it's also true that there are a couple of them that we can be working with. So if you can just not run one, that's also okay. That's not a real problem. But yeah, if you have the chance, it's better if you have these two different ways to access the organization or the project. So you also need to ask for permissions to give to the service account and the user. So my recommendation is that if you are going to be checking the whole organization, as you should, ask for these permissions to be given over the organization object. However, if the client just wants you to check maybe a couple of different projects, it's okay if they just grant these permissions over the projects that you need to check. And these roles are going to be roles viewer, roles resource manager folder viewer, and roles resource manager organization viewer. With these three permissions, you should be able to enumerate organization folder and all the assets or most of the assets inside a project. Of course, if at some point you are launching a tool or you are trying to enumerate manually something, or you want to investigate some information using the web console and you receive some message that you don't have enough privileges, you can always check which extra privileges will you need to check that specific access and ask for a custom role with those permissions, or maybe just check for a role with those permissions that is not going to be granting you much more and ask the client to attach them to you. If the client is creating a new project where the service account is going to be created, notice that you will also need to enable some project services some services APIs inside this project in order to be able to contact them. And you can check these APIs in, well, the most common APIs to use in the link provided here. However, as mentioned, if at some point you just get some kind of error saying, hey, this project doesn't have this service enabled or whatever, you can just ask them to enable it. Then when the audit is finalized, it is just possible to delete the service account, project, and user, and everything should be clean as at the beginning. So now that you know which permissions you are going to be requiring to perform this white box audit, let's start talking about the audit methodology. So far during this course, we have learned the GCP basics, then we have learned about how a lot of different GCP services are working, and also how they can be abused if an attacker manages to get enough privileges, if they are misconfigured. So now that we have this understanding about security in GCP, it's time to, well, just combine all this knowledge and create a methodology to be able to find as many vulnerabilities or misconfiguration as possible in the shortest time possible. So the things to check whenever you are giving access to an organization or to a GCP project is I divided them in 5 different sections. The first one is going to be the benchmark checks, and these are going to be just custom checks that are going to be performed in order to find all the low-hanging fruits and all the potential misconfigurations just by running some tools or performing some checks that are recommended by some external companies or maybe by the cloud itself. The next step is going to be to perform a service enumeration. So as in the first check, we will have already get some understanding about how is the organization or the project working, and we should be knowing already which services and regions are being used. The second step is just to take a deeper look about all the services, how they are working, how they are interconnected, with who is having permission over what, and just checking that the services are correctly configured. Then we can move forward to exposed assets. So of course we have performed step 1, so we know some low-hanging fruits, some misconfigurations, what services are used. We have also checked all the services deeply, so we find out exactly what is happening in these projects. Now it's time to check for actually potential critical vulnerabilities regarding to exposed assets. So as we have commented a lot in different lessons during this course, a lot of services are going to be able to expose assets to the internet, and this exposition might be because a bad configured firewall, because a port is exposed, because some machine is having a public IP address and it should have it, but also there are other potential ways to expose things using, for example, IAM policies, if maybe some broad access is being given to all users or authenticated users, or if for some reason some permission is being granted to external principals from the organization. So during this phase, knowing that we already have a general understanding about what is happening in the organization and projects, it's time to check potential vulnerabilities of all the exposed assets. And this is very, very critical because, well, if you manage to find something in an exposed asset, an attacker could just abuse it and maybe get a foothold inside the project. Then we can take a look to the IAM permissions. Of course, we need to do this review with the least privileges principle in mind, which basically means that every principal should be having only the permissions he needs to perform his actions, his functionalities, and no more. Or at least that's the ideal situation. Of course, it's fairly common to just find users with more privileges that they need. And to be fair with the pen tester, if you are working with an external company, maybe as an external pen tester, you might not even know actually what each user or principal is actually doing. So you don't really know which privileges they need. So my recommendation here is to check all the IAM privileges, list all of them, try to find all the principals with high privileges. This means me not only being admin inside the organization, but maybe having enough privileges to compromise services, escalate privileges, pivot, and so on. just generate a list indicating all the potential privilege principals and why are they privileged, and send this list to the company. Unfortunately, if the organization inside GCP is very big, this list might be kind of big and maybe not that readable. In that case, maybe what you should consider doing is just to kind of group all these users in different groups, so it's easier to report this to the client. But at the end, the goal of this section of the white box audit is to let the company knows all the potential problems that they might be having by granted too many privileges to users. Note that most of the companies using GCP doesn't really know about GCP privilege escalation by abusing different services to get a service account token and then continue pivoting and so on. Therefore, this is why it's so important to make sure that they understand all the risks they are having with all the agent privileges they have been given. And finally, we can talk about integrations. So, of course, nowadays, most of the companies that are in the cloud are also going to be using other platforms, such as GitLab, GitHub, Vercel, Cloudflare, even GCP and AWS at the same time. And it's fairly common to just generate some trust between them, maybe adding some credentials, giving some credentials to a platform so we can access the other one, or maybe connecting them via OpenID, or any other way to establish some trust relationship between two different platforms. So now that we are reviewing GCP, it is important to try to figure out which other platforms are going to be able to access GCP, and if the permissions assigned to this other platform are the correct one. So, for example, if we are granting some kind of permissions to GitHub Actions, it is interesting to check that only the desired permissions are being given to GitHub Actions, and also that only allowed repositories inside GitHub are going to be able to access these privileges. In this case, these privileges are going to be assigned to the service account that GitHub Actions is going to be allowed to impersonate. Also, in GCP, it is fortunately fairly common to be given permissions to different users and service accounts among different projects. Of course, if we are talking about the administrator user, it's of course understandable that this user is going to be having admin access over all the projects. But maybe if a service account have some kind of privileged access or some kind of access at the end over a different project from the one that the service account belongs to, if an attacker managed to compromise this project, he's going to be able to escalate privilege to this service account, and he's going to be able to abuse this service account to pivot to these other projects. So in the case of GCP, it's not also very important to check which other platforms are having access to GCP and how and which privileges, but also which kind of cross projects permissions are being given to users and especially to service accounts, because this is a very easy way to just for an attacker to just pivot across different projects. Let's now talk about a different tool. This one is going to be SteamPipe. So SteamPipe is going to be working by executing modules, and the first thing that you need to install is going to be the SteamPipe application. So if you are in macOS, you can just install using Homebrew. You can just run brew install turbot/tab/SteamPipe. If you are inside Linux, you can install the SteamPipe by running this script right here. And if you are in Windows, you will need to enable Linux in Windows and again execute the script. Once you have installed the SteamPipe in your local machine, you can run GCP modules by installing the GCP SteamPipe plugin. And in order to do so, you can just run SteamPipe plugin install GCP. This way, you're going to be running some GCP modules. Regarding GCP modules, my favorite ones are the insights and the compliance ones. The insights is going to be showing us a lot of information about the running services inside the GCP projects and organization that we have access to. The compliance module is just going to be able to run some benchmark, so it includes full support for the version 1.2 of CIS benchmark, 1.3, 2.0, and also for the CFT scorecard and for SETI security benchmarks. So yeah, SteamPipe is another tool that is going to be making us very, very easy to just execute a lot of checks over our GCP organization and find low-hanging fruits, and also all the services or most of the services that are being used inside this GCP organization we are checking. So let's now go to the console and let's execute it. In my case, I have already installed SteamPipe and the GCP plugin. I have downloaded from GitHub the SteamPipe mode GCP compliance, and I am inside this folder. And in order to execute it, I just need to run SteamPipe dashboard. So let's start running this. We can see that a page is open inside the default browser, and here we can see the different benchmark that we could be running. So for example, if we are interested in running the CIS 2.0, we can just click on it, and SteamPipe is going to start enumerating GCP, storing the data inside a PostgreSQL, and then getting all the relevant data for the tests we are running, and showing us the results inside this nice view. So here we can check identity and access management. We failed. Actually, we can see here the summary: 50 are okay, 81 are alarmed, 3 gave an error, 8 are an info, and 4 were skipped. So here we can see ensure corporate login credentials are used. So our uses corporate credentials, login credentials, okay. Ensure that there are only GCP managed service account keys for each service account. We can see that testing has a user managed key. However, the other doesn't have any user managed key. These are the JSON files for the service account credentials. It, of course, is not recommended to have them because they could be leaked at some point, or it could be used as a persistence mechanism. Ensure IAM users are not assigned the service account user or service account token. In this case, we can see, okay, some IAM users are associated with this service account token creator or service account user role, which of course give access to impersonate other service accounts from a user. Well, in general, we are not going to be checking all these findings, but you should be checking those in order to report them to the client. Also, you could go to the GCP console yourself and check that all the findings are actually real findings and they are not, I don't know, false positives that may happen if the plugin or the module or the check is a little bit outdated. But yeah, you should be checking for that. If you would like to run, for example, a different benchmark, you could just check, for example, the ForSeti security. You click on it, and again, you're going to be getting all the results in here. Cool. So the other plugin that I like a lot is the Insights one. We are not going to be running that at this point in time, but we are actually going to be showing you how you can run a SteamPipe using some service account credentials. Because if you remember, in this case, we just execute a SteamPipe dashboard. SteamPipe in this case is going to be using gcloud credentials. Remember that in order for applications to use some gcloud credentials, you first need to execute the gcloud auth application default login. In my case, I already run this, so I needed to run in order to use SteamPipe. But this is very important because if you're not used to use this, you might forget about it. If you want to use a tool that is going to be using gcloud credentials, you need to execute gcloud auth application default login. In our case, imagine that we want to execute SteamPipe, but we don't have access to a user. We just only have access to a service account. So in this case, we could just indicate the path to the applications, to the service account credentials using the environmental variable Google applications credentials. In my case, I have them in this path, and then just execute SteamPipe. So I'm going to be running the same module, the compliance module. I'm going to be opening the same sys benchmark. Again, this is going to be enumerating the GCP environments, getting some tests, and you can see that we actually use different credentials because we managed to find, oh, actually, I don't know. Well, we managed to find, if you go back in the video, we managed to find we have different findings. Actually, here we have less findings that with using the other credentials, basically because we have less access using the service account than using the other user's account, the user's credentials. So yeah, this is the way you will be able to use SteamPipe with service account credentials instead of using G-Cloud credentials. And then again, you could just be checking for this and finding out which failed test you should be reporting to the client. Also, if you want to automate this, you don't need to be looking the results in this nice HTML view. You could also indicate a SteamPipe that you want, for example, a JSON output that you can programmatically parse and be able to automatically create some reports using SteamPipe or any of the other tools that we are seeing in these demos.